Hi, everyone. Welcome to GradMissions Office Hours podcast. I'm Autumn.
Hey everybody, I'm Lizanne.
Hi, I'm Logan.
We are here today to talk about dum dum dum. I feel like we should pipe in some scary organ music. The med school secondaries. Med school secondaries. This is something that is probably the scariest boogeyman after the MCAT when it comes to applying to med school because of the giant question mark around timing of secondaries. When people first apply to med school, they're like, will I get a secondary? And they're nervous. And then once the secondaries start coming and they're laying underneath a pile of 30 of them, they're begging for mercy.
Question that I have about secondaries. As someone who has lived my life as med school adjacent, that's what I call myself, medical school adjacent.
Guilty by association.
Yes.
Mhm.
Why is it even worth? You can search on the internet, or if you're a GradMissions client, we will find it for you. Secondary prompts from previous years.
Mhm.
So you could conceivably pre-write your secondaries on a wing and a prayer that the secondary is the same this year as it was last year.
That's right.
Is that worth it?
I think it is. And here's the reason. As someone who has been directly associated with med school admissions, when we receive your primary from AMCAS, which right now is taking about a month to 5 weeks to get processed through AMCAS. So if you haven't submitted your application, your primary yet, it is time, give us a call. But it takes about 5 weeks to get processed through AMCAS. As soon as that happens, AMCAS sends your primary application out to your med schools. Or if you're applying through AA COMAS, it's going to be much quicker. So get ready. Send your primary app, and your primary app is the same basically to all med schools, right? It's going to be your biographical information, your personal statement, your activities and experiences, your other impactful experience, your letters of recommendation, your transcript, your MCAT score. That's kind of the primary app. Some schools will automatically send you a secondary application. This is basically the school's specific application questions that they want you to answer. Sometimes the school has a little bit of a screening process. They're going to look through your primary, make sure that your MCAT, that your GPA is sort of in their realm of possibility.
The
And
threshold, like meet a certain
you're
threshold.
right, you have to meet a certain threshold and then they'll send it to you. And if it's one thing we're seeing right now with secondaries, California schools, the UC system, if you're a California resident, you already have your secondary. If you're not, there's going to be a little bit of a delay. So sometimes the filter looks a little bit geography based as well. But what happens is as soon as that secondary hits your inbox, it's like the 60 minutes theme. Tick, 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 right? The timeline starts. Best practice is 2 weeks. They give you 2 weeks to get that secondary filled out, turned around, and submitted back to the school. But here's the thing. If you go all the way to the 2 weeks, or heaven forbid, past that 2 weeks, it's a pretty good indication to the school that they're not your number one. And so when they think about protecting their admissions yield, protecting their interview spaces, they only have a limited number of interview spots to offer. If you've made them feel like they're not your number one boo, they're probably not going to send you an interview invite. So even if you write a beautiful secondary, but it takes you 3 weeks to do it, it could hurt your chances of getting an interview offer. So that is why I do think it's a good idea to at least have noodled a little bit about what you want to say in your secondary so that you're ready to go. Or if you're a person who has, analysis paralysis and you're going to stare at that prompt and not know what to write for 2 weeks, it's really smart to pre-write. But as we've seen this cycle, sometimes it's an effort in futility, right?
Mm. Absolutely. I've seen several students upset that they invested a lot of time in pre-writing a particular essay only to have it change.
That's right.
So that deadline is 2 weeks the unspoken courtesy, or do schools say you need to send this in 2 weeks?
Some schools give a deadline. Some schools say we need it by this date. Some schools say, for earliest consideration, have it in by this date. Some schools say 2 weeks. Some schools say 5 days. But if it's not stated, 2 weeks is the assumption.
So if a school says have this in by November 1, do you really have until November 1?
No,
You
Kind of
have
like,
2 weeks.
yeah,
you have 2 weeks because
Okay.
2/3 of the interviews are going to pass by November 1.
right.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's a
So
gamble.
I mean, not the same, but kind of similar to the etiquette that we preach for law school, right? It's like, yes, their deadline may say March 15th. That is not your deadline. Your deadline is October 1st. You
Not
know,
if you want
because
to
you
law
want to
school.
show interest, you want to get in the door,
Mhm.
especially with the importance of the med school interview. Um, so it makes sense that, again, there's all these unspoken rules that is a great reason to work with grad missions because we know about the unspoken rules. Um, okay, I did not know that.
Yeah. And the other tricky thing about the animal that is the secondary is that med schools handle the interview process very differently. Each med school is like Logan says, like if you've worked for one med school, then you know one med school because each med school is their own little fiefdom. Just got a lot of little kingdoms operating here. And sometimes even when leadership changes, like one class may not even be able to really accurately mentor the most recent incoming class. If they have a new president, if they have a new dean, if they have a new dean of admissions, things can change. And so there is this concept of a blinded interview. And what that means is that at some schools, the people who will interview you will not know your MCAT or your GPA or your BCPM GPA, which is your science GPA. So, and the purpose of that is the admissions committee says, we have screened them for academics. These are the people we want you to interview. So it doesn't matter what their MCAT and GPA is at this point, they've met the threshold that we have for them. Your job, interview committee, is to interview them as a person, right? To look beyond Casper and preview these situational judgment tests to get to know who they are. And so there is a chance that your interview committee, the people interviewing you, will only see your secondary.
Hmm.
That is their blinding mechanism. Now, I know because I'm, a coding geek who goes to double AMC meetings all the time. There is a way for them to be able to see your primary and blind the academics. There's a function where you can do that. The problem is people running med schools are doctors and they're not tech savvy. And so they don't know you can do this. And so they literally will just give them your secondary. So here we've spent all this time writing this beautiful primary application and they're not even going to see it. But
Oh,
then there
wow.
are other med schools, they're going to see your full application and your academics. And so you have to write your secondary right
As
on
the
the line.
primary post,
Right.
like,
Like not being redundant, but covering the similar ground, making sure you're restating your branding. Like your secondaries are almost more important than your primaries, honestly.
and again, for the newbie here, the interview, like you said, a lot of times the interview questions are based on what you submit in your secondary or
Yes. So yeah, the interview questions will be sort of centered around that, but the scoring rubric for the interviews is typically those 15 core competencies that double AMC has. And so how do you in 5 secondary essays prove 15 core competencies plus establish your brand plus give them enough threads to grab onto to ask you good questions so you don't feel like you're being grilled in your interview? It's a steep order.
wow. And the core competencies, it's something that we walk through clients. This is a question I'm asking. So, like activities and experiences, like in your primary, you submit that in a document, but then you want to thread those into your secondaries so that then it goes into your interview. Is that
Exactly. You have to thread it that way just in case, but you can't say it exactly the same. You
right?
also, word to the wise, can't just throw it into Chat GPT because schools are going to run these through a filter. And if you think you're going to outsmart them, you may end up applying to a med school that doesn't do this, but more and more, they are going to run it through 5 to 13 filters. And they're going to know, like, oh, you just, phoned this in, skip. I'm not going to invite you to interview. So there's a lot of factors at play with secondaries.
I had a question on, a common prompt. It can be written lots of different ways, but, overcoming adversity,
Mhm.
right? That's a even if you're interviewing for a job, that's a common prompt.
That's right.
We're maybe almost out of this season if you are applying to medical school directly from undergrad, but if you took a gap year or more, we're definitely still in that season. But what are your thoughts on answering that question with something about COVID?
Mhm. Oh, such a good question. And you can tell, Logan and I can tell which secondaries have not been updated since 2022 because they're still very COVID laden, even though these kids are like, I was in 8th grade, so I don't know. I was a freshman, so I wasn't impacted by COVID. Um, I think it really depends. Like if you had a family member who passed away from COVID, obviously that's something you can write about. The whole world was at a disadvantage. And so assume that 70% of the essays they're reading about something that was hard for you are going to be about COVID. If you think you have a really stellar thing to say about that, that's going to stand out, great. But if you're just talking about the fact that you couldn't go anywhere, you couldn't get shadowing experience, and you had to take your lab online, you're going to sound like everybody else.
Yeah. That's not unique at all.
No, no. It's sort of like we talked about a couple of episodes ago with the activities and experiences, and you talk about like that we vaccinated or did a lot of COVID testing. Like, yes, every single person has said that. Like, what else? Like, show me something special.
Gotcha.
Secondaries are, every school, I think, thinks they're super unique. Right? They're like, oh, this is our secondary, but there are definite, like Logan just said, you've overcome adversity. One we're going to see a lot. You can go ahead and just start planning. I wonder about, and we're actually working on making this a little more formal, writing types of secondary essays instead of school specific essays. I think that's probably a better use of your time. And even if you don't write them, but you just sort of start these concepts marinating in your brain, something you've overcome, how you've worked with diverse populations or people with different kind of access to healthcare. They're going to ask you sometimes to talk a little bit more about your activities and experiences. Like, tell me about why you picked this most meaningful. Tell me about it, for instance, when you were at that most meaningful experience. What are some others, Logan? Some common secondary questions.
Why this school?
And we have
Now,
law school side too. Why X law
I
school?
see perspective
yes,
So
statements.
common.
which,
But
you
the
know,
main
we,
thing is, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
oh, I'm sorry. We just talked about, you want to write types. I still think you could write a type with the why blank school because you know what you're looking for, right? If hopefully you've applied intentionally and there are certain things that you're looking for at each school. And so you know what are our different, I'm applying to this school because it is mission aligned. I'm applying to this school because it's going to give me early clinical experience in my education. You know what your criteria is, and hopefully that's why you applied to those schools. So just even starting like a bulleted outline of story examples and reasons why and things like that I think could be valuable pre-writing that's also intentional with your time.
That's right. That's right. And you also have to be careful with that because if you are relying on the school's website to answer that YX med school or YX law school, you have to know that's what everybody is doing. Like Lizane, we worked at a law school that had a beautiful courtroom, right? A beautiful courtroom. How many times in the why are you applying to this law school when someone was applying from out of state did they reference that courtroom by name? And even a handful every year would even name how many seats were in the courtroom. I'm like, that is
But
not
you copied and pasted from that page on the site.
you
Yeah.
just copied and pasted from the website. And so schools are savvy to this too. They're going to read it a million times. And so one little tip and trick we'll give you for free is to follow them on socials. Follow the schools on Insta. Look at the 3L or the MS3 takeovers on stories. Look at the kind of things that they're saying about the school and write about that. Because these websites for law schools and med schools are stale, right? It takes 6 years to get a new website, and you have to have buy-in and purchasing and region approval and faculty approval. And by the time you are seeing a website, that is old news. It's old news, but it's absolutely free for admissions people and leadership to promote their ideas, their forward-thinking things on their socials. And so reading their blogs, reading TikTok, if they have TikTok or Instagram or even LinkedIn, is going to give you a little deeper, fresher insight than just going to their website and looking at what was important to them 6 years ago.
Alumni networks too. It's a good thing to look at, see what they value. I think that is one of the things at GradMissions that we really push is that personal brand. And Autumn, you've mentioned it a few times in this podcast, and people are like, a brand? That seems so silly. But I think that's kind of where this plays into some importance both on the med side and the law side, is if you spend some time as a student, as a pre-law, pre-med student, thinking about your personal brand, meaning your unique journey, your values, what you align with, who you want to be around, the community that you're looking to build, you can take that kind of as your foundation, your scaffold for when you're writing secondaries. Obviously, you have to meet the specific requirements, but two, it makes these things a little less daunting when you're viewing it as you're not trying to mold yourself to fit a specific school. Yes, that's important in some ways, but seeing how that school and you would align can help just bolster any writing, whether that's law or med. We meet with so many students who are thinking, well, I've got to look on the Reddit forums, I've got to look on their website to see the specific type of law student that gets into that school or specific med student. And I think that matters again a little bit, but I think the bigger thing is to really think about your brand and your goals and then fit that into these, and maybe not so much the secondary. I know they're very rubric intense, but I just always like to just talk about kind of the mindset work around that. Like, it's okay to, you're never going to find the specific formula for what a school is looking for, because they're not looking for a specific formula um, in some regards. And so just thinking about maybe before applying, before doing all these things, like spend some time journaling, writing down, you know, and doing research too on the schools, but seeing how it aligns with what you want as a future professional, I think is important too.
That's right. Well,
That's
Zane, you're an Aldi shopper. I love an Aldi as well, right?
Yeah.
So you and I like to say that you don't tell Aldi what you need, Aldi tells you what you need. You need to be the Aldi applicant. That med school or law school is not going to know what hit them if you show up as uniquely yourself
Yes.
and aren't afraid to be vulnerable. Of course, like there's decorum in these essays and the way you write them and all of that, but it's okay to be yourself. Like you should be. You're going to have a better experience if you haven't tried to cram yourself into a mold that doesn't fit you. You're not going to be able to be excellent at something that isn't true.
For sure.
perfect bridge too to another common secondary, which is what would you contribute to this
Mm,
school or institution? I mean, that's the perfect way to lean into that question is with your own personal brand,
mhm,
knowing confidently who you are and what you bring
mhm.
to a room, a situation, an institution.
Yeah.
That's right. And med school and law school, once you get in, are a little bit of like a mind gamut too. And when you know who you are and you are confident in that, even if you're just faking it till you make it, if you're faking it about the right things, you're going to have a better experience. There is an element of confidence and hubris that you have to do because you have to be successful in these places. You have to have the confidence to know that you're still smart, even if you need to go and ask for help, even if you need to dig in about something, even if you're struggling and you're making a bad grade, right? Like we have all seen the national merit spiral that happens when these brilliant kids get to med and law school. And for the first time, they face academic adversity and they're like, oh, what in the world? I'm not special anymore. My whole identity was being perfect and I'm not perfect anymore. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Like that's going to happen. And so when you've done the kind of mindset work, when you're writing these essays and you really think about what are you going to bring to that med school, to that law school, um, it doesn't really matter what the med school is. You can write that same essay for every single one of them because you are who you are, no matter which school you're showing up at, you're showing up the same.
Exactly. Yes. That's a great way to put it. I was trying to think of like the chameleon, like you don't want to write yourself as what you think they want. You want to write it as who you are. And
Exactly.
you're saying, Autumn, I'm sure med and law is the same. That first year, you may be second guessing. You're like, oh, I'm not perfect. I'm not as smart as I thought I was. Everybody is here so smart. And just kind of having that during this, stressful phase of applying, just knowing your why, I think can really carry you through the application process and then through the rigors of med and law school too.
That's right. That's right. Another common application question that we see is, write about interacting with someone from a different culture than you. Write about someone who had a different background than you. And sometimes I see people respond to this with their unique culture. And this is a different thing. So the place to respond with that different culture, if you come from a unique lived experience or a unique background, that's the other impactful experience. That's your perspective statement. That's where you do that. When a secondary, and law school optional essays have this too. There's a couple of law schools I can think of that ask a question like this. UT, for sure, Stanford does this as well. Talk about a time when you had to interact with someone who had a different belief system than you, and like, how did you handle that? And you don't talk about how you did your own Jewish birthright trip. Okay, great. Like, but that's you in your echo chamber doing the same thing you've always done. You grew up in temple. This is not, yes, it is a culture, but it's not you interacting with a different culture. They want to know about a time when you were outside of your comfort zone and had to meet a patient or a client where they were.
Yeah.
Oh, what a time to answer that question. What a time in life to
And
have
it's
to answer
the
that
only
question.
time. Yeah.
Yeah, well, right now it's like, well, I went to the grocery store, and had to interact with someone different than me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But these are all, again, these are things that translate into that first year of med or law because, hello,
Yes.
you're going to be around, you're going to be debating and talking through ethical hypotheticals, I'm sure, med and law, for people who think differently from you. And so they're not just asking it to get you admitted, they're asking
Not woke.
you're really going to struggle if you
Right.
can't think through these things prior to going to law or med school. You're really going to struggle with that.
Absolutely, absolutely. And there's been pushback both at LSAC and LAMC about the woke agenda making its way into applications. And we don't get political on this podcast or at GradMissions at all. Like, we have space and family members of all different shapes and sizes of the political spectrum. But the reality is, so when you are a physician, you don't have control over who walks through your door. You just don't. And so med schools need to make sure that they are training up a group of doctors who can serve their community. And so they just want to make sure that you have at least thought through these things about how different people come to medicine. We have a couple of clients right now, Logan, I don't know if you are in their files yet or not, but one from Peru, and one from India, who the Peruvian applicant has a deep history in folk medicine. His grandmother is a medicine woman, and he was really nervous. He works for like a cancer research lab in California. Like, he's a brilliant researcher, but he also has these like folk medicine roots. And so he was like, can I write about that? And, the answer is yes, yes, of course you can. You can absolutely write about folk medicine in there. And that's his, unique, what he's bringing to medicine. But he also works for a cancer research lab where they are very much in this kind of Western medicine traditional model. And so he was really able to write his essays in a way that shows both of those things. So it doesn't mean that you have to disappear and shrink, but it's just holding that space for both and being able to write well and introspectively. And it's okay in those essays to talk about it being a struggle, right? It's okay to talk about that it's hard for you to understand why a pediatric cardiology patient's mom wouldn't let her go on birth control, even though it is debilitating to her to have a potential pregnancy. But like, we're at an ethical dilemma here. How did you handle that? You're going to be faced with things like that in med school. And so they want to know that you've at least started thinking about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think those interactions too start even, before you enter the field. It starts within your cohort.
Whew. Did you ever have any med school drama in that vein, Logan?
Oh, I mean, I could write, when I write my tell-all book, I'll include it in there. I can't give out my secrets now, but interacting with your classmates in, whatever type of small group system that you have, you're going to have people that view the world differently than you do. And that's actually the perfect training ground for exercising the Hippocratic Oath.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Do no harm with your words, with your actions, with the way you interact. Yeah, I think that's right. So secondaries, chins up. You've got this. pace yourself, respond as soon as you can, pay attention to it. Don't repeat yourself, but cover your ground. Emphasize your brand. And if you need help, give us a call. We're going to turn off the lights here in the pod loft. We're always on in socials. Look forward to interacting with you all there, and we'll see you next week.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.